Hello, my name is Brandon, and I'm a software engineer for Basis International. Today I'm going to be going over the BBJ code formatter and showing off a couple of new enhancements we made that we hope to be beneficial for our users. For a general overview of what we will be covering, we'll go over what the BBJ code formatter is, what new features and enhancements have been added, why you should actually care about the BBJ code formatter and use it, and a brief wrap-up of everything we talked about in this presentation. What is the BBJ code formatter? Basically, the BBJ code formatter plugin gives you an easy way to format and clean up your BBJ code with the simple press of a button. It's tied in directly with Eclipse and becomes easily accessible when you download and install the BBJ utilities. It allows you to select the BBJ source file that's open in the editor and quickly format it to a specified standard. The output that's generated can be customized and fine-tuned through the user preferences. There are a couple of different types of formatting that the BBJ code formatter can do. It can remove line numbers, which is required by the BBJ code formatter when trying to use any other type of formatting in the user preferences. It can remove line continuations and apply a standardized indentation for readability. If you want to convert single-line if statements to multi-line if statements, it can go through and convert all of these over. If you have multiple statements on one line and want to make the code a little easier to follow, the BBJ code formatter will go through and move the statements to multiple lines if it notices that the statements are separated by a semicolon. The code formatter can also go through and convert all of the business basic keywords to uppercase. So, how do you use the BBJ code formatter? To start off, open a BBJ program in a BBJ editor. Click the Format Toolbar button, which is located directly above the open source file with the rest of the BBJ utilities. After a brief moment, you will notice the code that's open in the editor will be formatted. You can either save the file if you like the changes that were made, or revert back to the original file. To see some more of the BBJ code formatter in action, here are a couple other examples of formatted code. If you have a single line if statement, it can go through and move it to multiple lines. Before, the code was condensed on one line, but after formatting, the code has been moved to multiple lines and is much easier to follow and understand at a glance. In the original code, the developer was making use of line continuations. After formatting, all of the code that involved the line continuations has been moved to a single line that's easy to follow. Here is a BBJ program that is still using line numbers. Notice that the program also includes a couple go-to statements pointing to the line numbers. Now you might remember that a denum is required when using the BBJ code formatter, but might be skeptical that it will affect your code, especially if you're also using statements that go to a specific line number. But after performing the denum, you'll notice that the code has remained intact while the line numbers have been removed. Any statement that involved going to a specific line number has been replaced with a label, and the code works exactly as it did before. You also won't have to deal with renumbering your files now if you need to add a couple lines of code before the label. Now for the new features and enhancements that have been added to the BBJ code formatter. In the past, the BBJ code formatter has been limited to the amount of customizability that the user has had when formatting BBJ source code. Other than a few user settings found in the preferences, the BBJ code formatter has largely been you get what you get when formatting. This doesn't necessarily work for everyone's workflow, and we've noticed, which is why we're trying to give the user greater control over their formatted code. As a step in the right direction, we've added the ability to go through and collapse multiple blank lines into one, remove all trailing white space at the end of each line, and change all end-of-line characters to a specific type that is set in the user preferences. Let's look closer at each of those features. For collapsing blank lines, if enabled, the BBJ code formatter will go through and find any instance of back-to-back blank lines and collapse them into one. Previous versions of the code formatter removed all blank lines and condensed the code unless it came across a special statement such as an if or on close. But now blank lines that were inserted by the user will now remain intact to help improve code legibility. Only time lines will be removed now is if the collapse blank lines is enabled. Best part is that all of the previous code formatting features remain intact and don't have an effect on the blank lines. For a quick preview, the following code has multiple instances where there are multiple blank lines mixed in with single blank lines and no blank lines. Running the BBJ code formatter with collapsed multiple blank lines enabled will result in the following output. As you can see, all instances where there are multiple blank lines have been condensed into a single blank line, while the rest of the code remains untouched. Special statements, such as the on-close statement at the bottom, retain their previous formatting rules. For removing trailing whitespace, it's pretty straightforward. If enabled in the settings, the BBJ code formatter will go through and check the end of each line for any whitespace. If the line contains any whitespace, it will be removed. In this little snippet of code, both the API and sysGUI lines contain a little bit of trailing whitespace at the end. If we run the BBJ code formatter with remove trailing whitespace enabled, all of the whitespace will be removed and the lines now end with the last character. Both of these new settings can be found at the bottom of the code formatting section under the BBJ code formatter user preferences, where they can be both enabled and disabled easily. The final feature we're going to go over is changing the end of line characters. Depending upon the desired outcome, or the type of system the code is being run on, there may be times you need a quick and easy way of changing the end of line characters. The BBJ code formatter allows you to go through and replace all end-of-line characters with one of the three options. Option 1 is probably the most common, which is the line feed character, or, as you might know, \n. The second option to choose from is the carriage return, or \r. The final option for Windows users is a combination of both the line feed and carriage return character, which is the double \r/n. Once one of the options are selected, the BBJ code formatter will go through and find any end-of-line characters and replace them. Let's take a look at an example. The message line contains three end-of-line characters. There's a \n, a \r, and a combination \r/n. Let's see what happens when we enable end-of-line character replacement. If we choose the line feed character and run the BBJ code formatter, you will notice that all of the end-of-line characters have been replaced with \n, and the rest of the code of the line has remained unchanged. Same thing happens if we change from the line feed to the carriage return character. All of the end-of-line characters are replaced with a \r. And last but not least, all the characters are replaced with the double character \r/n. The characters can easily be swapped back and forth without any issue, depending upon which one is needed at the time. This new setting can be found under the code replacement section in the BBJ code formatter user preferences. It's set to ignore by default. So why should you care about formatting your code? Well, formatted code has many benefits over unformatted code. The most noticeable improvement you'll likely come across is readability. Formatted code is much more legible over its unformatted counterpart. Since the line numbers are removed when formatting, you also don't have to deal with the go-to statements involving line numbers when trying to follow along in the code. This makes the code much easier to follow. The code formatter also greatly improves readability by using matching indentation. All lines of code that are in the same block will have the same indentation. This helps immensely when trying to follow through the code and see what's executed and what isn't. Going off readability, formatted code can also greatly improve efficiency. Having code that's easier to read also makes it easier to follow along. This means less time trying to figure out what's going on and more time trying to fix any issues or bugs. This especially speeds up the learning process for new developers trying to understand the code base. Formatted code can also lead to a reduced number of bugs in the code. The human mind can do amazing things, but sometimes it might get stretched a little thin. It can be hard to keep track of all the variables and other things going on in your program, and you can easily lose track. Formatting your code helps with following along and knowing where you're at in your program and what still needs to be done. It also completely removes the stress of having to follow styling rules while you're coding, so you can just focus on what you're writing. Another area that formatted code has added benefits in is in consistency. Everyone using the same coding style helps standardize the code across developers and teams. Once all the settings are the same, everyone can format their code with the push of a button, and the code format will be the same as the developer sitting right next to you. There also isn't a learning curve for new developers. They push the same button, and their code is in the same format as the rest of the team. Another area where consistency will be improved is when using diffs. Since the line numbers are removed, only actual differences in the code will show up when performing a diff. New line numbers or any sort of thing in that nature won't appear as a difference anymore. This makes it much easier to read through the diffs and actually see what's changed, which helps when you're trying to consistently keep track of files. So to wrap everything up, developers can expect to see great improvements in efficiency and readability when using the BBJ code formatter. These new features are intended to complement the existing formatting options and are the first steps towards giving users more control and flexibility over their formatted code. We plan on expanding the amount of options users have when formatting their code in future BBJ releases.